All right, welcome back. This is the fourth presentation of Chapter 3 on federalism. This is the last one we're going to do. We've been talking about how federalism has evolved, how the federal government has, over time, taken on more and more of a role in terms of attempting to influence the state and local governments through the use of grants, and how that has, to some extent, entangled and complicated the relationship. A lot of people would like to see a more simpler relationship. The problem is modernity does not really tolerate that kind of simplicity. Most states and most local governments lack the resources to do a lot of things that they're expected to do, and the consequence, on the one hand, at the lower level, is a proliferation of local governments. A lot of governments that are simply tax zones. They're just designed to enable local governments to draw revenue, which is an artifice that reflects the fact that at the local level, even though they spend over $1 trillion annually, that they have fairly limited ability to accrue revenue. So let's jump into this. We talked in the last, at the end of the last presentation, about increasing federal and state tensions on a couple of areas. We're going to deal with two additional ones. Of course, marijuana policy. Federal law going back to the early 20th century basically held that marijuana was a Schedule II narcotic, which basically meant it had no medical value and was basically lumped in with heroin. Nevertheless, the legalization movement has resulted in 37 states in the District of Columbia legalizing marijuana. What has happened is going back to the Bush administration in the early 2000s, the federal government has basically allowed the states to experiment with these policies. And so the result, I think it began in Colorado. In Colorado, again, they bring in a lot of money, but it also brings some issues. You know, there are very few things that are simply unalloyed goods in the world, and marijuana legalization has come with lots of positives in terms of, you know, enormous revenues going into the state, but also, you know, lots of problems with crime, drugs, you know, dependency, you know, things like that. And then, of course, the most recent issue, of course, is abortion policy. The precedent established in Roe versus Wade in 1973 was recently reversed in about a year and a half ago in the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health decision. The Supreme Court returned the issue to the states, where you have had an enormously confused regime of regulations that have emerged. Some states have attempted to basically just say that it's never legal for a woman to terminate a pregnancy. The resulting patchwork of state policies is almost certainly going to continue to produce lots and lots of conflict. So in a lot of states where they have abortion bans, they're trying to figure out ways to prevent women from traveling to other states to terminate a pregnancy, which again is a basic abridgment of people's freedom of movement, and the question is going to be whether that's okay or not. And then, of course, recently again the Alabama Supreme Court declared that fertilized embryos to be used for in vitro fertilization are, for the purposes of Alabama law, children. Which again brings into question the legality of in vitro fertilization, which again a lot of people rely upon to have families, which is again something that the state is generally interested in doing. State and local tensions, again, as just as the federal government displayed an increased willingness to coerce states, so too are states oftentimes willing to compel local governments to do their bidding. Local governments are often willing to innovate in ways that the state government opposes. One thing that's happened, for example, in some conservative states, you've had some municipal governments say, well, we want to raise the minimum wage. We want to attract more workers. And the best way to do that is to pay better. And a lot of states, they've basically passed preemption laws preventing states from doing that. And of course, you've got the sanctuary city thing. There's a lot of other, issues, regulation with, car and home sharing, Airbnb, Lyft, and things like that. How those things are regulated are increasingly, again, becoming areas where the state governments and the local governments are coming into conflict. One of the more contentious state and local issues, of course, is the regulation of firearms. A number of states have passed laws preempting strict local ordinance of firearms. A number of states have gone in the opposite direction, repealing previous preemptions and opening the way for more strict local regulation of firearms. The Supreme Court's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin expanded dramatically the right to gun ownership with a very, frankly, bizarre decision by Clarence Thomas, basically saying that in order for a gun regulation to be to pass constitutional muster, it had to, you have to be able to find a historical analog from the period. From the period where the Constitution was ratified, which is, again, frankly, I think bad history, bad law. We'll see how long it lasts. So what do you think? America's experience with federalism shows that Americans broadly accept that states should have latitude to enact policies that reflect the will of their constituents. But the variation across states may deny some Americans, access to fundamental rights. Some critical questions we want to consider. In what ways does federalism reflect a struggle over power and political ideas? Is it fair that a transgender person in California can legally change their sexual designation on their birth certificate, but a transgender person in Tennessee cannot? Is it reasonable that a gun owner can openly, carry a handgun in Georgia, but not in Florida? Is it fair that voters in some states can use drive-through voting, but voters in Texas can't? Why or why not? Why are we allowing these kinds of variations, when they actually infringe upon people's constitutional rights? Another question: how might your life be different if you lived in a different state? If you lived in a state other than Oklahoma? Imagine being a student in a state with very different state college tuition levels, or a state with a very different minimum wage level. Imagine living in a state where you can vote early in person, or where there's no pre-election day in-person voting option. These are all questions that are, directly relate to issues surrounding federalism. So again, federalism is a very complex issue. It's a very essential issue to understand in order to have a good, nuanced understanding of American government. I hope you learned a lot from these presentations, and I hope, again, if you have any questions that feel free to ask me. I will see you next time, where we will take up the issue of state and local government, sort of a bottom-up look at federalism.